I have a bit of a confession to make because I have been keeping a secret from you guys. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Miniature Abode. My name is Shelby and in this tiny corner of the internet we discuss and craft all things 12 scale miniatures. A few months ago, Minimum World announced their Halloween competition. If you're not in the UK, Minimum World is arguably one of the best online miniature stores that we have here in the UK, and the criteria that Minimum World set was really good. So all it had to be was Halloween themed, preferably, but it could be an item, a room box, a section like this, a full house. It could be anything you wanted. It could be any scale. It could be gory, it could be whimsical, it could be creepy, it could be spooky. Again, anything you want it to be. The only thing we had to make sure of is that we included either a cauldron or a broomstick, and I decided to go with the cauldron. So to give you a little bit of context as to my project, I think every miniature enthusiast will relate to this. We all have a bit of a background story, a bit of inspiration that's come through in the project, and this is mine. So I named this project Cooking Up a Storm. In my head, this is a corner of an old cottage that has broken away within the storm. We have got a little witch who is quite literally cooking up a storm in her cauldron. She's also preparing her evening meal. I will give you a bit of a tour of the project in just a moment, and I'll explain how I've created each element as we go through. You might recall me saying this in a previous video.
I have been watching Ava at Bentley House Minis. She's been working on her Beetlejuice house, and it's kind of making me want to do a Halloween house, but I don't have the funds and I don't have the time and I don't have the space for something like that right now. So we've just got to keep focused.
Yeah, and it was true. I did not have the time, the funds or the energy for a Halloween project. I created this project in stolen moments of time, I'll be honest. It was in the evenings when filming for Close House wasn't ideal, between real life reno jobs and before work and after work. Just whenever I got a spare moment, I would just tinker and do little bits and pieces until it all came together, and it was honestly so much fun. I did record some footage and I've included all of it in this video for you today. In areas where I haven't filmed, I have explained how I created this project all the way along. So without further ado, let's get into the tour. So I'm going to do my best to explain how I created each element of this project. Some items were purchased, for example the door handle and the stair banister that you can see here, whereas a lot of the elements were created completely from scratch. The candles on the corbels that you can see here were actually inspired by a method that Queen City Miniatures showed us in one of her videos. She used real candle wax to create the melted candle effect, and I thought it looked really fantastic, so I decided to give it a go in this project. The candles themselves are made from polymer clay, the wicks are black thread, and then I melted a tea light and made sure to drip it over the candles, down the corbels, the wall, and also I created a little puddle on the floor for a realistic melted effect. The curtain is made from a scrap piece of fabric which I stained with tea. I've then also glued it to make it look as though it is blowing in the wind. You can't really see it in this video, but there is actually a hole in the glass made to look as though the window has been smashed. If you look really closely, you can see our little witch. She's riding her broomstick through the lightning and the storm clouds. The most intimidating part of the project for me was easily this cauldron. I knew how I wanted it to look in my head, but trying to get that image from my head into my hands was a bit of a challenge for me, and it did take me a couple of goes. I'm really happy with how it's turned out, and I will show you later on in the video how I created it. The cooking table was probably the best part of this project for me. I really enjoyed creating it, and again later in this video I will tell you a little bit more about how I created each element. As you can see, our little witch is creating a stew for her dinner later on. In the brown paper package wrapped up with string, there is actually a severed arm. Delightful. I created the books in the bookcase using my cheap method of scrap foam board and then just wrapping the book covers around that piece of foam board, and some of the books I have aged. This is just my go-to method when I need to create lots and lots of books, and particularly if I don't intend on having them open. There is a trapped ghost in a glass jar there. You can also see a Ouija board and some tarot cards. The book on the table says How to Serve Man. This is just a little joke in my mind. I imagine that our little witch has misinterpreted this book as a cookbook, but in actual fact it's a manual on how to be a good servant. All of the ingredients on the table were created with polymer clay. Because of the unevenness of the floor, I imagine that our witch has put a piece of folded up paper under the table leg just to keep her table steady. The external structure of the project was made using 5mm foam board. I took notes from Aira over at Bentley House Minis. She built her Beetlejuice doll's house entirely from foam board, and she used dowels in the corners to create extra strength and stability. So thank you for that tip, Aira. I then covered all of the external structure with finishing skim, including the fireplace and hearth, as you can see here. This step was a lot of fun because I didn't have to be too precious. I didn't want the walls to be completely smooth. I wanted to create that old cottage, uneven wall look. I did paper mache the hearth and fireplace before using the finishing skim, again just to create that uneven texture underneath and to give the fireplace extra strength. I then went in and aged the walls further using a range of tools, including the back of an old knife, a toothpick and balled up foil. I then aged the walls using watered down paint. I basically created a dirty dishwater colour, and then I covered all of the walls with this wash, and it helped to bring out some of that uneven texture. I was really happy with this step. The floor tiles were made using air dry clay, which I cut into squares and rectangles of various sizes. I then filled the gaps using the finishing skim to create mortar. I then aged all of the floor tiles with various washes of browns, greys and greens. I knew that there was going to be a lot of wood in this project, so I took a bundle and I used my tried and true, my favourite method of painting the wood using an old rag and wiping it straight off again. This gives your wood a really nice aged effect, and it also helps to bring out the grain. I added some egg carton stones to the bottom of the hearth and also a few on the walls just for some extra detail. I aged these using shades of brown, grey and beige. Another slightly intimidating part of the project for me was building the staircase, only because I've never had to build any kind of staircase from scratch before, and it did take me a couple of attempts to get my measurements correct. I did keep reminding myself though throughout this project that this is supposed to be a rickety old corner from a rickety old cottage, and therefore it didn't need to be perfect and pristine. I am actually really happy with how the staircase turned out in the end. I have learned some lessons from it. There's areas that I would do differently next time, but for a first attempt I was actually really chuffed. I purposefully bought a damaged banister rail from a clearance section because I knew that I would only be using a portion of the banister, and I always intended on breaking the spindles for that extra storm damaged rickety old cottage effect. And I am actually really pleased with the overall look of this. It turned out so much better than I expected. You'll notice in a moment that the roof piece was a later addition. This is because I always knew that I wanted some sort of roof piece, but I just couldn't figure out how to do it and how I wanted it to look. Then one day my yard brush decided to disintegrate on me, and I decided to use the bristles to create a thatched roof effect in keeping with the old cottage look that I was going for. And I am actually really happy with how this turned out as well. Again, it turned out way better than I expected. I'm a particular lover of bare wood doll's house furniture. Let me know if you agree with my point in the comments. For me, pre-stained, pre-painted doll's house furniture just looks too perfect, and I guess so it should. For me, I much prefer an aged piece. I want my pieces of furniture, regardless of the project, to look as though they've got a story to tell. They've got a bit of a history. They can tell you some things. I am really happy with the effect I managed to create on this hutch. So I created this by using wood dye, brown paints and black paints, and I just tried to focus on the details of the cabinet. So the back detailing, the edges and the legs, I just basically painted on the paint and then pretty much wiped it straight off. I'm really happy with how this piece turned out. I created the table that our witch is cooking at completely from scratch. I used scrap pieces of pre-painted wood that I had lying around and cut each piece to size. Nothing fancy, nothing spectacular about this build at all. Initially, I did plan on having 2 levels to this table, so of course there was going to be a tabletop, and then I was going to put a shelf at the bottom. Whilst I was gluing this project together, I decided to forgo the shelf at the bottom, simply because I started to get worried about there being too much detail, too many surfaces. Sometimes I think less is more, and I was also worried about not being able to see some of the other detail within the project. So, for example, the floor, the hearth and the bookcase, depending on which direction you were viewing the project at. I just thought maybe the shelf being front and centre would take your eye from some of the background detailing. There was lots of books to make, and I used foam board to help speed up that process. So I just thought I'd show you quickly how I do that. So I apply glue to the inner pages of the book cover and then simply wrap it around a scrap piece of foam board and cut and trim to size. I love this method when you've got lots of books. It's so much quicker than concertinaing lots of pieces of paper, and I do think it looks really effective as well. I created the cauldron using black polymer clay. Initially I created 2 cauldrons, you can see the smaller one here, simply because I wasn't convinced on what size I would need for the finished hearth. Removing the foil was a little bit frustrating, but I got there in the end, and then I smoothed the edges using a nail buffer and a blade, as you can see here. I wasn't too worried about the lumps and bumps on the inside of the cauldron because I knew that the cauldron would be filled and these wouldn't be seen or felt. This is my first time ever creating a cauldron, so no, it's absolutely not perfect, but for this project I was really happy with how this turned out. To fill the cauldron, I first installed a small LED light with a white LED light, and I initially attempted to fill the cauldron with cotton balls. I liked the effect, but I wasn't quite happy with it, so I pulled it all out. That's why you can see it is a little bit furry around the edges still, and then I had another go at it. This time I used cotton pads, which were much thinner, and I used the blade to thin them even further, and I was much happier with this. I couldn't be bothered to wait for my hot glue gun to melt, so I just stuck these pieces in with PVA, and do you know what, it turned out absolutely fine. Using the cotton wool as well helped to diffuse the light. Initially, when I had my first attempt, the LED was too bright because I was too concerned about covering it up, but actually I did cover it up a little bit more the second time around, and I'm really glad that I did, because the LED is still really bright in the project, but it's also diffused. It's not as bright as what it was initially, and it does look much better for it. By the time the cauldron was filled with cotton wool, my glue gun was ready to use. So I used it to create the lightning strikes, and I had also previously used it for the bubbles. In my previous attempt, I used gold and blue mica powders to add colour to the lightning strikes and the bubbles, and I really did not like that look. So this time I decided to keep them both clear, and I am much happier with the overall effect. I knew that I wanted the logs in the fireplace to look as though they were actually on fire, so I decided to very carefully char one end of each of these cut pieces of twig to create that effect. For additional detail, I made sure to cut each piece in half again to make them look like chopped logs when they were in the fireplace. I glued the bulb for the fireplace flame into position, and then I very loosely glued each piece of chopped log on top of the bulb, but not too much because I wanted to make sure you could still see the glow of the bulb underneath. Creating each element for the cooking table was easily my most favourite part of this whole project. For the cauldron, I half filled it with hot glue, and then I mixed various shades of brown paint with PVA to create the gravy. I filled the cauldron all the way to the top with the gravy, and I then added the vegetables. I made the vegetables from polymer clay, and I made carrots, mushrooms and potatoes. I also made 2 parsnips and a turnip, and these were used as display on the table as well. For additional detail, I made sure to add a potato that was partway through being peeled. I'm really worried about being censored for violence, so we're just going to call this part the unfortunate ingredient. So to create the unfortunate ingredient, I made a mould of this doll's arm, and I then used Fimo in the colour Sahara to create the unfortunate ingredient. It took a bit of priming, but I got there eventually, and I basically just pushed as much of the Fimo into this mould as possible. To make sure I got the detailing of the hand, I made sure to spend quite a bit of time pushing and kneading the Fimo into all of the gaps and crevices using a range of tools. So I used a dotting tool and sculpting tools to really push the clay right into the very corners and tips of the hand. I did actually try several methods of creating the unfortunate ingredient. Initially I tried using the mould with air dry clay, and each time I did this, various parts of the unfortunate ingredient would break away and the detail would be lost. So if you're planning on doing something similar, I highly recommend baking the Fimo clay. I then created an additional detail for the unfortunate ingredient, and I had to create a hole and then a small log, which I then added more detail to and cut it off. Without the visuals, I don't think any of that would make sense, but I'm hoping that with the visual you can kind of understand what I'm going for here. Again, I am really happy with how this part of the project turned out. I thought it was such a cool and cheeky little detail, and just a little bit of a laugh really for our poor little witch who has misinterpreted her guidebook, shall we say. Once the unfortunate ingredient had had its time in the oven, I very carefully removed it from the mould. Upon removing it, I realised that it did need a little bit of shaping, so I just very carefully took my blade and cut away the pieces until I got a smooth finish. I wasn't too bothered about it being perfect. I knew that the unfortunate ingredient would be wrapped in paper and that there would only be so much of it that you would see, but I still didn't want these uneven raw edges. Once I was finished carving, I then took some red, brown and black paint just to add another element of detail to our unfortunate ingredient. Filling the hutch was another really exciting part of the project for me because this meant that we were finally at the finishing stages. I filled the hutch with a basket of mushrooms. I have a short on my channel showing you how I made that. I then also included jars. The jars are filled with resin for poison. We also have a love potion. There is also a jar with eyeballs. They were a lot of fun to make. A jar of rat tails, and we've also got a jar filled with flowers. These are just some dried flowers. I think it's baby's breath that I had on hand, and I thought they would look really adorable in this jar, and I think they do. I think this really finishes off the hutch and it just gives a little bit of a feminine touch to our witch's cabinet. I also put some more books. There's a couple of pumpkins in there, some papers with potions on them, and tarot cards featured within this hutch as well. So I'm really sorry for the shaky camera footage here. Despite my hobby of choice, I do not have a very steady hand at all, but I wanted to show you in a bit more of a close-up some of the detail and the items on the dresser. So you can see there we've got the jar of eyes, we've got the rat's tails, the love potion, there's the books, the basket of mushrooms and some pumpkins. I just really feel like all the little bits came together to create a dresser that was just full of detail and a story of its own to tell. In just a moment on the stairs, you're going to see a little doll. This was my attempt at creating a corn husk doll, and I made this with used dry tea bags. Thank you so much for joining me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed touring Cooking Up a Storm with me. I mean it, I had an absolute blast creating this project. This was so much fun, and I don't know why I've never created a Halloween or a fall themed miniatures before. Halloween is easily my favourite holiday, and autumn is definitely my favourite season. So yeah, this was right up my alley. I really enjoyed this. I cannot wait for next year's Halloween competition. I definitely will be taking part, and I've already got so much inspiration and ideas flowing. So watch this space, check back next year. But in the meantime, there will be another Claus House video coming up. I am planning to work on that today. So if you're here for Claus House, thank you for your patience. There is a video coming, and I'll catch you guys very soon. Bye. I created No, you please. You just twitter away in the background there, that's fine. This clock. Oh.